Well, why don't we go ahead and jump in. So welcome to everyone. This is the AIA Digital Design Series. Today we're going to be talking about the NZELI panel discussion. And it's something that we at Energy Trust New Buildings, we like to collaborate with AIA Code and have a discussion about once a year just to kind of keep information going and inspiration going. So this is going to be the one for this year. So just a couple reminders about technology, just remembering to keep your mic muted during the presentation, and then during Q&A, you're welcome to unmute and you can either ask your question or you can put it in the chat, and I will be monitoring the chat and I'll be happy to ensure that your questions get asked. And we would love to have as many questions as possible and a dialogue once we're kind of to that section of the presentation. So camera it's great to have it on speaker view so that you can see both the speaker as well as the presentation. This time we're not going to have very many slides, so it's probably okay to keep it in a broader view if you'd like. And there are continuing ed credits, and here is more information. Oh, and the presentation is being recorded as well, just for your information. So AIA has some community agreements, and I know that you've seen these before, and these are kind of generated through the Committee on Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. And so I'll just take a moment and let you read through these community agreements that we have for the event today. All right, thank you. Here is the continuing ed information. So it does have one HSW credit, and there's the presentation and the information for reporting. We will be able to, we're happy to share this with you again if you'd like. So hopefully you have all marked your calendars for next Friday. Oregon is having its annual Architecture Award celebration in the fantastic Portland Art Museum location. So definitely mark your calendar for that one. Hopefully some of you are already planning to attend, but it's definitely a wonderful event that has tasty food and lots of inspiration through the awards presentations. Here's the learning objectives for today, and I know that that's a lot of words on there, but I just wanted to make sure that we had time to kind of look into what the objectives are that are going to contribute towards our continuing ed credits. So it's explaining requirements, understanding the experience, discussing best practices, and then kind of learning content to help inform our firms and explore opportunities from the Energy Trust grant process. So we have some three kind of primary amazing speakers today. We have Matt with and Erica. Well, actually, Erica's not there this time. We have John and Lindsay, and Naomi's going to be doing a little broader introduction of them. So just a couple slides about Energy Trust, as we are the grant, we give out the grants for the NZELI. And Energy Trust is an independent nonprofit, and we serve, I think, just under 2 million customers of Portland General Electric, Pacific Power, Northwest Natural, Cascade Natural, and Avista Natural Gas. And really, kind of our primary focus is to ensure that these little cuties have a clean, affordable energy that they will have access to, as well as everyone who supports them. So we want to see the world be able to support clean, affordable energy for now and for the future. All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen and let Naomi come on, and maybe Naomi, you can give a little more info about the 2030 challenge, as well as the NZELI awards process.
Yeah, thanks, Ellen. So we promised this was a no slides event. So we're done with slides. I wanted to take just a couple minutes to talk about this acronym NZELI that you just heard a lot from Ellen, and that was part of the title of this event. But first, talk briefly about AIA 2030. I assume if you're on this call, you know a little bit about it, but part of the reason we do these events is to promote the AIA 2030 challenge. And so if you're not familiar with it, or you just know a little bit about it, it is a commitment to carbon neutrality by 2030 with interim reductions until then. The idea is to get designers to track and understand their progress towards achieving carbon neutrality so that it can inform your designs over time. And to meet the challenge, firms have to sign a commitment letter, create a sustainability action plan, and then do annual reporting on the design performance of their portfolio from the previous year. And so that's mostly what we're going to talk about today, is that design reporting. There are close to 40 firms in Oregon that have signed. There's about 1,000 nationally and a couple internationally. And one thing you might not know is that there's also now 2 related challenges for engineers. There's the MEP 2040 challenge for MEP engineers, and there's also SE 2050, which is for structural engineers and actually looks at embodied carbon of materials. And tell your engineering friends and colleagues to look into these programs. We have started to do some work with both of these national initiatives to start to engage more Oregon engineering firms and get them to sign on. And our internship, the NZELI program, which is Net Zero Emerging Leaders Internship, starting next year with the next application cycle, is actually going to include these 2 engineering challenges as well. So we're trying to find more alignment across A&E firms in the industry and in Oregon. So the NZELI program, this internship, is part of a net zero grant offering that Energy Trust has. Part of it, I can never fail to mention, is that we have a research fellowship. And so if you have a particular topic of interest that you think is essential to advancing net zero buildings in Oregon, we encourage you to submit a proposal. We award up to 2 fellowships of up to $50,000 each year. And so it's a pretty unique opportunity to delve into a topic of interest to you and your firm that could also benefit other folks in Oregon. The other part of the grant program is this internship grant. And so Energy Trust awards several grants each year to architecture firms and soon to be engineering firms to hire an intern to support them with their 2030 reporting. And we award up to 6 grants a year, up to $8,000 per firm to hire an intern. The idea is that these interns are students in architecture, engineering, sustainability programs. It could be as broad as economics, someone who has the skills or is looking to develop the kinds of skills that it takes to do this sort of reporting. And firms must be signatories by the time they submit their application. So applications for the next round of funding will come out in April. We just awarded 5 firms, several of whom are on the call today. Or I guess a few of whom are on the call today. We just awarded grants for 5 firms who are now in the process of hiring their interns who will start their work in January. The internship occurs in the first quarter of every year so that it aligns with AIE's 2030 reporting deadline at the end of March. So if you are interested in personally being notified about either of these grant programs, I'm going to put a link to our website and also my email in the chat, and feel free to reach out to me and just let me know you're really interested in them, and I'll be sure to reach out to you personally when the applications come out. So that's a little bit of context on our Energy Trust grant offerings and why we're convening this panel, and we've been doing it every year. And the intention behind these programs is really market transformation and encouraging more firms to sign on, say they're all in for the 2030 challenge, and to hopefully make it a little bit easier by providing this additional capacity and a cool opportunity for students in this space. So most of probably what you want to hear is from the 3 folks who are going to present today. And so I'm going to briefly introduce them and they can go ahead, I think, and turn on their cameras, or yeah, go ahead and turn on your cameras so that I introduce you, and then they're each going to give a little bit of context. So we've got Matt Bokar, who was recently with Salazar and has participated 3 times in this program as a mentor, so has a lot of experience with AIA 2030 reporting. We've got Lindsay, who is currently with Sarah and helps lead their 2030 reporting. And she was also an intern in this program in our very first year in 2019 at Holst. So she can speak from that perspective as well. And then we've got John Lundstrom, not Erica Dunn. Erica was going to originally be the Green Hammer rep. So John is with Green Hammer, and they're a two-time recipient of this grant and have a long history of 2030 reporting and have actually sort of gone beyond just the operational emissions reporting to embodied carbon and some additional data sets. So they've got a broad range of experience that they will share with you, and you will have a chance to ask all of them questions. But what we're going to do now is just give each of them a chance to talk a little bit about their role at the firm, why they are tasked with doing this work, and their history, the history of reporting, what's been hard, what's been easy, and what kind of routine they've created to make this all more streamlined now that they've been at it for a few years. So with that, Matt, why don't you go ahead and start, and then we'll go to Lindsay and then John.
Thanks, Ellen. Thanks, Naomi. Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining tonight. My name is Matt Bokar. I'll be talking a bit about the 2030 implementation story at Salazar that took place over the last 4.5 years. So I joined the firm in summer of 18. We signed up about a year later in 19. And during that time, two big things were happening. The firm was growing. I was number 6. We were 11 by the end of the year, and we were about 15 when we finally signed up. And at the same time, the firm was working on forming our 4 committees: community, well-being, equity, and then sustainability. My role was to oversee the work of the Sustainable Design Lab. So that included the 2030 stuff. And then I was lucky to work alongside a talented group of about 4 to 5 design professionals on that design lab team. So the growth and the development created an environment, gave us just enough confidence to make that jump, to sign up. So we didn't have everything figured out, but the decision aligned with our guiding principles, and we were confident that we had a team in place to, figure out the rest. So we signed on in late summer 2019, started working through some of the initial challenges. Small growing team, it was very important to at least get a preliminary understanding of 2 big things: short and long-term financial investment and the anticipated annual time commitment. So we did a lot of internal research, looking at other firms who had done it. We studied the process and the tools a lot. And heck, we learned a lot from other folks at other firms who had been through it already. Another step, testing different energy modeling tools. So the folks on our team at that time happened to have a bit of experience with Sapphire and Insight. So we started with those. And after about a year of using those pretty successfully, we pivoted over to Cove Tool. The Revit interoperability was very important, and it just seemed like a more intuitive fit with our typical multifamily work. We were also focused on building a team. What types of expertise do folks have right now that we can leverage? And what things might they be passionate about? What directions do they want to grow? Plus, figuring out ways to effectively train internally, or when we had to bring in an outside consultant for more targeted training. So in addition to those 2 things, testing and team building, we also tried to be really intentional with creating a prototypical design process. So how does that Sustainable Design Lab intersect with the project teams? And then how do we figure out how to thoughtfully manage and document this time that's going into this new effort? Finally, not directly related to the 2030, but we published our first sustainable action plan. It was more work at a time when we were very busy, but looking back, it became really invaluable, kind of crystallizing current identity. So who are we now? And then future goals. How might we want to grow as a team? And looking back, it really helped to ensure everybody was pulling in the same direction. So in hindsight, signing up felt like equal amounts, trepidation and excitement, because there's always the fear of the unknown. But we were lucky to have a motivated and talented team that we put our trust in. And, I think it's important to acknowledge the process is iterative and progress isn't linear. So it's easy to say, don't get discouraged by the little things along the way, but we found it really helpful to kind of maintain that collective focus on why. Why are we doing what we're doing? Kind of recalibrated our goals and our focus. There was some easy stuff, generating support. So it was easy for staff to get excited around this new initiative, created a lot of energy and buzz. And there were some side benefits. So the business development, how we, what types of projects we chased, marketing, how we presented ourselves, hiring, recruitment, retaining existing staff. I mentioned it earlier too, and Sarah and Greenhammer are two very good examples of experienced firms that we learned a lot from. Portland's a small place, full of experienced design professionals, and I found they're usually eager to share. So it created a lot of opportunities for cross-pollination. We might be learning from them on the 2030, but maybe we can reciprocate on things like housing or community participation. And like Naomi mentioned, we were lucky to participate in the ETO NZELI 3 years and also the PSU Research-Based Design Initiative 3 years. And I was lucky to participate as a mentor, and it is true, learning by teaching others. And I believe we got as much out of those experiences as the students did. So after first reporting in 20, our annual process became a lot more efficient each year. The current model is monthly sustainable design lab meetings where we kind of identify upcoming modeling needs. So who has time to work on that, who's on the project, who might be able to work on it. We also check in on work in progress. So how is that going? Does that person need any support? How's it going on schedule, fees, so forth. And then I was able to function as a conduit with firm management for staffing. So if we identified folks who might need help or projects who might need capacity, we had that direct conduit to the staffing conversations. The DDX process, it was a work in progress. So we found for a team our size, any models that were completed, we would just try to get them uploaded to DDX to just check them off the list. And then work in progress at the end of the year, we tried to impose, not always, but end of February, create an internal deadline. So we had some buffer before the real deadline. And then I mentioned the sustainable action plan. The hardest part was that first one. And then each year we would issue an updated draft just to recalibrate who we are and what we wanted to do. Looking forward, net zero energy. Our team had done a lot of studies, but never got a real project. So that would be a real joy. Operational carbon and life cycle analysis. So we toyed with EC3. It's great for more detailed stuff. We were primarily using Tally because it better aligned with our typical work. I mentioned business development. So looking for those opportunities with ambitious but achievable sustainable design goals. Contracts. So always refining our approach to scope and schedule and fees and consultant teams. And then as a corollary to the 2030, our team was passionate about the climate justice and environmental equity. So continuing to research those and implement them into our work. And so in summary, for anybody considering signing up, it's totally cliche, but I believe we figured it out and you can too, but it is work. And I'm really proud of what our team did together. That was a really crucial part. And at least in my experience, that first step of signing up was the hardest part. So if you can get past that, easy part's done, hard part's done. Thank you very, very much for your time. I look forward to questions. And Naomi, I think I'll kick it back to you.
Thanks, Matt, and I'll kick it to Lindsay.
Great. Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Lindsay Naganuma. I currently work at Sarah. I started as, back up. As Naomi mentioned, in 2019, I was a NZELI intern at Holst. So working there was very interesting because they were still in the early phases of just trying to figure out, is it more efficient if we upload all of our projects at once? Is it more efficient if we go one by one and we try to do this throughout the year? And really dialing that in. But now I work at Sarah and I've worked there as an architectural designer for about 2.5 years now. And my role at Sarah is 50% sustainable design and design research, and then 50% like regular architectural designer, bathrooms and all that good stuff. And so I assist with the 2030 reporting every year. And at Sarah, they signed on as a really, really early signatory in like 2010. And I think initially when the Architecture 2030 Challenge came out, the DDX actually didn't exist for the first couple of years. So the earliest that I could see in the DDX that they had reported was 2014. So I assume that's when the DDX was created, but before that, it was like in an Excel sheet that you would submit to the Architecture 2030 challenge, and that was just how you did it. But moving forward over the years, they've really honed in on the way that they do things. I think initial barriers, obviously baselines are always challenging. How do you start to set baselines and understand what's good, or how to reduce your energy if you've never tracked your energy? So really just getting started is the number one thing that you can do. One thing that's interesting is energy modeling can be super, super intimidating if you don't have in-house capabilities, but I would say don't let that stop you from signing up at all. Sarah, we are a large firm, but most of the time when we're doing energy modeling, it's conceptual in-house. It's conceptually like to understand some of the early design decisions that we're making, but we're not really using that for 2030 reporting. We're really working with a third-party energy modeler, and we're reporting that data, or we're just using the energy code and the building use type, and really like the DDX gives you a lot of defaults that you can rely on. So if you're not an energy modeling guru or you don't have that at your firm, it's totally okay, and you can definitely work through that. Since Sarah has been a part of Architecture 2030 for so long, their routine is pretty dialed in. We start by just filtering the list of projects that have hours billed for that year. You sort of have to filter through this just because sometimes you have like marketing things, or you have projects that were just studies that you might have done for feasibility or something that might not trigger an energy code and might not be reportable. And then we usually reach out to project teams to determine the best person to get that information from. And then once we have the defined list of people that would know about the project, we send them a survey. At Sarah, we try to report on everything that we know at the time. So we definitely always do energy, but like if we know about budget or carbon or other things like that, we'll usually send out the form to include everything, but then kind of give the caveat like it's okay if you don't know some of the things. This is very robust. And then obviously people are very busy working on actually making buildings. So sometimes there's some stragglers, and really just sitting down with people and helping them understand like what information you're asking for, and that you by no means are you expected to do any math to report this. Like our sustainable resources group that we have at Sarah will be doing any math that's required. You're literally just giving project information and helping it be super digestible is super helpful. And for Sarah, it's actually faster to manually enter the projects. There is a feature in the DDX that allows you to batch upload, which could save you a lot of time if it's your first year reporting, because you can just put it all in an Excel sheet and hit go. And then if there's no like syntax error, then it just magically uploads all of your projects at once with just the push of a button, which could really expedite the process. But sometimes it gets a little finicky if the project was reported on the previous year, or it might try to make a new project. So for Sarah, since we have some projects that just go a year and some projects that go over 5 years, it's just easier to manually update them. And that's what we've found. But then at the end, usually similar to Matt, we like to leave enough time at the end, a little bit before the deadline, to sort of do a bit of quality control and make sure that we really understand the data from the energy perspective. Like, does this make sense? Are these defaults seeming like that they're accurately representing our project, or is something going wonky here? Like sometimes you'll put in what you think is the energy code and what you think is the building type, and then you're like negative 30% reduction from the 2003 CBEX data, which would probably be impossible if you built your building at least a code. So funny things like that, just making sure that you have enough time for that. But yeah, and I guess what's on the horizon at Sarah, we are very interested in embodied carbon and total carbon as well. We also use Tally to run most of our whole building analyses. Yeah, EC3 is good for detailed things. But what we have been finding is just trying to figure out how to have the timing of when you report energy meet the timing of when you would be able to run all those LCAs and put the data in. And so that's something that we've been working through in the past couple of years, just because it takes us more time to collect the embodied carbon data. But yeah, so that's Architecture 2030 at Sarah. And now I'll pass it back to Naomi.
Thanks so much, Lindsay. It's great perspectives. Okay, John.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for including Greenhammer in this. We're excited to be here. For us, we became signatories in 2017, about the same time I started. I'm an architect and also the co-director of design for Greenhammer. And so we have a little different than other people. We're both architects as well as builders in-house. And around 2017, we started focusing on the goal of having all of our projects be net zero ready or net zero. And so I'd already had an energy modeling sort of loose process in place and started recording in 2017. We started participating in the grant program and having young professionals join us to help us kind of dial that process in 2019. And for us, what the challenge became is, and I think a lot of people have similar challenges, is some of our projects were easy to energy model, the budget could absorb them, but some of our smaller projects, it was hard to come up with a strategy to financially set aside time or work into a budget to be able to do energy modeling. So we really looked at bringing on a young professional to work with us, try to come up with a way to find some efficiencies, and eventually kind of dial in a process. And so we chipped away at this over 2 years in the program. First, we kind of went through and did a similar thing where we tested out what are the different energy modeling programs, what works best for our process and our objectives along the way. We looked at a variety of different energy modeling software. For us, we landed on a product called Woofy, which is it's a German energy modeling software. If people are familiar with Passive House, that is one of the tools that FIAS, Passive House US Institute, uses for certification. And so there's a few of us in-house that are Passive House consultants. We were familiar with that, and it worked well for our process and some of our other goals that we had in-house as well. So after looking at different software, we focused on Woofy, and then we started to work again with the young professionals and the interns and really trying to figure out how can we streamline the process so that every project can have an energy model performed, not just the ones with a larger budget. So we developed some tools and some resources to be able to do that. We, as a process, generally focus on similar types of construction, similar assemblies. So we were able to build some templates, you can call them, into our energy modeling, where we have like a library essentially of assemblies, our sort of go-to assemblies. So we were able to find ways to kind of speed up the energy modeling process and make it a little bit more quicker, efficient. And then also focusing on how do we integrate it into our design build process at Greenhammer. And so that started with talking about it right during the sales and contracting process, and then each step of the way through design, as well as each step of the way through construction, and making sure that, you know, we had a couple touch points. For us, we do, you know, a schematic design. At the end of that, we make a point of entering the project into the DDX, and then we'll do a couple more sort of updates to the initial energy model. But at the construction document phase or beginning of construction, we'll usually do another update at that point. And then at the end of the project, once we verify through our commissioning process that all the systems and materials and assemblies have stayed the same, we'll do a final update there. And so 2 years of sort of fine tuning. It's still definitely a work in progress, still face challenges. Having an intern to be able to help us work through this was really key. Even though we were doing energy modeling, it's really allowed us to get to kind of the every project has an energy model. And I think this last year, the third year that we participated in the program, when the DDX started to allow the opportunity to record embodied carbon, we saw that as an opportunity to, again, try to see, well, how can we get to a point where we can do that in every project? We had previously done some research on our projects around embodied carbon, and we had an understanding roughly of how we were doing, but really was seeing an opportunity to say, can we get to a point just like energy modeling where we're doing embodied carbon modeling for every project? And that's definitely still a work in progress for us. Not something we've been able to do on every project, but again, identified some tools, with the interns, looked at researching tools. We landed on Tally, EC3. Recently, those things have become a little bit more integrated. And since we did the program, there's also been more tools that have come out, and there's constantly more tools such as Beam. So that's definitely an ongoing process. And I'd really encourage anybody who's interested in, diving into and starting, even if you're just starting from the beginning, if you can even just model 1 or 2 projects, or if you want to start getting into embodied carbon, bringing on an intern and starting to explore these programs and what works for your process, what works for your project type, your clients. It was super valuable for us. And I think for the future for us, we're still focused on trying to dial in understanding how to set goals for projects around embodied carbon, which starts with measuring it. So again, the modeling is super important. We really can't set goals for ourselves unless we understand how we're doing. And then the last bit of that is, the amount of existing buildings in our environment that need to be retrofitted. And so we're really looking towards how do we now do energy modeling and embodied carbon measuring for retrofit projects, which present sometimes their own unique challenges as well. So that's where we're going in the future. I'll kick it back to you, Naomi.
Excellent. I'll jump in, Naomi. Thank you so much, John and Matt and Lindsay. I think you gave some really great information about your experience, but also kind of action items and thoughts that could get people thinking about their next steps as well. Let me ask, does anyone have any questions? Feel free to take yourself off mute and answer your question, or put it in the chat. I have gotten a couple, but I wanted to see if there were any others before I jump in. Okay. I'm going so one that we got was any advice for helping convince my first leadership to sign on for AIA 2030? Feels like we've been talking about it forever. So does anyone have some thoughts? I don't know, Matt, maybe that's one that seems like it could be in your wheelhouse.
Thanks, Ellen. Yeah, and you'll see I just posted a little chat activating the closed captions. If that's something you or Naomi or Ellen or Kathy could work on. It's tough because I think it becomes a catch-22. And John, Lindsay, I'd love to hear about your experience too, as an intern and then also as part of the team that implemented. It can be kind of the pushing the rock up the hill. So without that buy-in at the management level, and I don't think it can be a top-down, I don't think it can be a bottom-up, I think it has to be 360 degrees. So coming from the perspective of a firm that grew from 6 to say 24 and specializes in affordable multifamily housing, so very mission-driven from that perspective, I think it helped to sell the narrative, not sell, but contextualize the narrative that environmental justice is social justice, climate justice. this is all intersects. So finding ways to create handles. So whatever your firm's version of that recipe is, how is it authentic and genuine to you? Because to talk to Sarah or Greenhammer, I'm sure it would be a slightly different conversation. So for us, it had a lot to do with, there was interest, luckily, at the management and ownership level. And that would have been nothing without the enthusiasm and energy from the staff level. So I think you need all of that. And firm size, I think, absolutely intersects with this conversation. John, I'd love to hear, you mentioned you guys got it going in 17, and it's kind of integral to the way you work. So I imagine the sales pitch was probably easier. Does that sound right to you, John?
Yeah, I mean, definitely it was easier internally because sustainability and energy modeling was already on our radar. It was something we were doing for some projects. But like anything, it also wasn't an easy thing, and it continues to still be challenges. You know, we're all faced with timelines and budgets that, you know, it's a challenge. I mean, so what I would say, even internally, when we were facing, you know, trying to raise the bar, trying to reach a goal, is sort of SMART goals. Maybe some people have heard about that, but the idea of coming up with a goal that's simple, that's the first S in SMART, then something that's measurable, and then you come up with an action item for that. That's the A in the SMART, and then something that's realistic, that you can realize, and then putting a timeline to it. And for us, it's really kind of also identifying, well, what are some of the immediate roadblocks? So really just starting simple. So if it even is, maybe it's just starting with an action plan and just around sustainability and just coming up with a strategy or a goal around how you want to embrace sustainability within your organization. You know, trying to say that you're going to energy model every project out the gate, that's great, but also probably not realistic. So I think coming up with a simple goal, figuring out what those roadblocks are, and then just starting to chip away at those roadblocks one by one. Definitely a big roadblock is going to be actually going through and doing the energy modeling process. And I think that's where this program comes into play too, is because if you can apply for the grant, you receive the grant, and are able to bring in somebody, the youth are so jazzed about working on this topic. They're wicked smart. They've got their finger on the pulse. And so there's really great discussions that come out, and they can really help accelerate some both excitement, but also just the ability to learn around this changing field it's changing so quickly. So yeah, simple goals, starting small. I just can't say enough about the resource of having, you know, the ability to bring in funds and grant and have a student working to help. Yeah, having that person there is going to also create this motivation, like hold you accountable too, to continue to explore and move through whatever that learning process is.
Absolutely. Thanks. Lindsay, did you have anything to add on that question?
Not a whole lot, since Sarah signed on so early, but I think just also really just showing how broadly it's been adopted, and, you know, really energy modeling can be a lot, but know that there are defaults, and like everything is scalable, right? So if you have a lot of time, you can really go down a big rabbit hole, and energy modeling, life cycle analysis, you can just do it all. But also at the same time, if time is very, very limited, there is a minimum that needs to be reported, and definitely getting an intern on getting the grant can be super helpful. Yeah, definitely, like bringing a new perspective to it, or working with someone else to sort of in the early days decide how you want to create that process. And once you get a process going, you know, it's only just going to get easier and more dialed in each year you do it. So
Yeah, thank you. Those were great thoughts. We had a question from Juliet wondering the overall percentage of your active projects. Did you end up reporting, and what percentage did you model?
I think we've varied over the years. There's generally we're reporting close to 100%, maybe somewhere around 95%. And then energy modeling on those is 100% of what we report are energy modeled. As most recent, when we started in 2017, those numbers were a little bit lower, but we pretty much everything that we report is modeled.
So would you say that you've just kind of been slowly ramping up to a point of 100% over the last 5 years or so?
Yeah, most definitely. Yeah, and I think the big jump for us was when we got the first intern and that grant in 2019. That really catapulted us to be able to get to full 100% reporting. I think close to it in 19, but definitely in 20 and 21. And it ebbs and flows depending on the project types. Some present some challenges, but yeah, but our goal is to every project that's coming through is energy model.
Nice. And Matt and Lindsay, would you say you guys were also seeing it at 100%, or was it a little different at your firms?
Yeah, so at Sarah, we report 100% of any project that has a large enough scope to trigger an energy code. I would say it varies on how many are energy modeled. Since in-house energy modeling is usually just conceptual at Sarah, we're usually working with a third-party energy consultant for any energy modeled projects. In slower years, like in 2020, I know it was like 30% of the projects that we reported were actually energy modeled. And then other years where it can get up to like 65% of our projects are energy modeled. It just kind of depends, similar project type. When I was an intern at Holst, they were still just trying to figure out what the most efficient way to report was, but they did report everything that they did similarly. And I would say maybe 30 to 40% of their projects were energy modeled.
And
All right.
the point you made, Lindsay, about scalable, I think is really insightful, because when we signed up, we were, probably a smaller firm. So when we signed up, call it 10 to 12 people. So the challenge was much more manageable than by the time we doubled in size. So plus, as you all know, the proportion of work isn't kind of linear. It's more exponential. So, at 12 people, there were much fewer projects to model. We did all of them, and we put an equal amount of time into those models. And I would argue the precision got better each year. So 100% from the start, same amount of effort, but like you, John and Lindsay, you said earlier, you get better each time. So we did them all from the start. We did them all at the end. I think they got better over time, but just being mindful of, firm size, the number of projects you're trying, the scale of the projects, how much time. And Ellen, forgive me if I'm stepping on your toes, but John said something earlier, and I'd love to hear Lindsay and John's thoughts on the new construction versus renovation. Is that okay if I ask them a question?
Yeah.
But like John,
Absolutely.
John, Lindsay, what do you guys think about, and John, you touched on it, and for firms like Sarah, who was doing this stuff before it was cool, right? Before there was even a DDX, like, what are your insights into the existing building renovation modeling versus new construction? Are there things you look for or have learned from your experience?
Oh, that is a great question. And we don't have a lot of data on that. The biggest one is a daycare project that we had. The energy modeling of it, basically, so we'll get actual energy data about utility bills from clients for existing buildings that we renovate. And one of the things that, as we started to get into, it's going to veer off a little bit here, but embodied carbon, we started to, in this last internship, and I think even a couple of the interns might even be on this call, we started to look at embodied carbon for a renovation. And what we found, and it's similar to energy modeling, is with embodied carbon, there was a need to essentially model the existing condition, understand what you're saving and you're retaining, because that is carbon that is it's existing carbon that's sequestered, that you're staying sequestered in a way, and then model out what's new. And so we haven't done an energy model of an existing building. We've just used the actual data from occupants' use, and then use energy modeling tools, the EUI tools, to set goals and make an improvement on it. But there's a lot more to learn about that process, definitely for us.
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the things that's really hard with existing buildings is you kind of need an energy model to report it in the DDX, otherwise it gets super wonky if sometimes there's like grandfathered in energy codes that if it's like a historical preservation of an existing building and things. And so we've run into some interesting challenges, but similar to what you mentioned, like just starting by understanding what's the current EUI, how can we, what are we allowed to touch that would improve the energy performance of this building, and then manually report our energy improvement that way. So if it's not energy modeled, it's a little bit more difficult to kind of understand what's going on there. If you can't just rely on, like, you're designing to a particular energy code, which is going to be X amount better than the CBEX baseline, the architecture 2030 references. But yeah, we are still struggling with that and figuring out what the best practice is. But currently we just manually report our reduction based on if it wasn't directly energy modeled. But if it is, then it's pretty clear what your reduction is.
I'll add one of the tools that we've utilized too in the beginning and also in the commissioning in the end are blower door tests. That also helps us understand the amount of improvement we're doing. So because we also do a lot of our mechanical design, often in-house or sometimes in collaboration with other partners, we'll do some energy modeling for the new remodeled piece of it. But again, that if we do a blower door of the existing conditions and then the blower door at the end, we kind of also get a really good metric, obviously, of the air tightness, which has a huge impact on the energy performance. So that's another metric that helps us figure out if there's an outlier, right? If there's an error, if there's one of those wonky numbers that, doesn't seem right. And if we, so sometimes it's a bit of an art as much as it is a science.
Yeah. Did that answer your question, Matt? Okay. So we also have a question from Karen in the chat about how does this process work for single family homes? Has anyone tried it for single family homes versus commercial buildings?
Yeah, I can chime in. I mean, I would say that probably 70% of what we've recorded in the DDX is residential. So, because we do a mix of single family, multifamily, and then some small commercial spaces. So again, for us, on residential, we do our own mechanical design. And so we'll use the energy modeling to help us understand if we're hitting our targets. So we'll set an EUI goal right when we start a project, and that'll help us choose assemblies, massing strategies. Again, we, particularly in our design process, we focus a lot of it around passive house principles. That gets us usually 90%, 80% of the way. And then we use the energy model as basically to check our work and make sure that we're hitting our EUI, hitting our targets. And then depending on the project type or the complexities, sometimes we'll hire out and have somebody do a heat loss calculation specific to the project to help us again dial in our mechanical systems along with our energy model. And yeah, so for us, we use Woofy because it's parallel with Passive House, and a few of us are certified in that, familiar with it. And just like I mentioned, we'll do an energy model schematic design, see how we're doing. Obviously, with residential, the big thing is going to be potentially overheating in the summer, solar heat gain. And then we use that energy model to dial in, say, selection of glazing types for windows, making sure we're not overglazed, and dialing in. I would say this: the one advantage of, and it isn't an advertisement for Woofy, but the one advantage of Passive House and Fias is that their certification program uses cost data along with energy performance data to come up with the metrics. So we know that when we're using their tools and their metric system, that it's balancing costs. So we're not over insulating a home where we're not going to see payback, or someone's spending too much money up front on insulation. So there's a balance there with that approach that really works for us. We find it works for single family pretty well. Does that answer? Sorry, hopefully that answers your question.
Nice, yeah. Matt or Lindsay, and thank you, John. That was really thorough. Hopefully, Karen, if you had additional thoughts, feel free to throw them in the chat if you needed more context. But Matt and Lindsay, do you have any experience with the single family homes and the reporting?
We really don't. At Sarah, we do a lot of multifamily housing, but don't usually get to the scale of single family.
Yep.
And what John said, a lot of and similar to what Lindsay just said, focusing on multifamily, primarily the affordable, but doing enough kind of ADU work that we've exercised that muscle. And building on what John said, yeah, there are a certain number of just assumptions around envelope, fenestration systems, roofing, that sort of stuff that you can kind of start with based on your professional experience. What we found, especially on the smaller scale stuff where the moves are more limited or constrained, it's just a smaller box, there's fewer things you can do than a bigger box. To do some rapid prototyping early, just to play with form and slope and really test the argument. Like, we assume this works best, but let's just iterate to have the data in our back pocket to back it up. So especially on the smaller scale stuff, we found upfront, and this is where the Sapphira and Insight pivoting to Cove, we found Cove really quick and intuitive with those early studies, massing, fenestration. Sometimes it confirms, we think this is going to work best, great. Sometimes it's totally different. So, but just to have that objective data in your back pocket, and so it kind of intersects with your design process. How much time are you putting in up front? Not just greenwashing at the end, but kind of building in those fundamental principles, citing, form, all these things. So back to you, Alan. Thanks.
No, that's great. I love how you were talking about the integration of all of those, kind of starting at that shoebox level, working to a more complete modeling process. So we have another question. It says, I've heard about MEP 2040 and SE 2050 challenges. What are those about? Does anyone have any experience with those they could share?
We don't have any experience, but I believe it's referring to both the structural, basically structural engineers and mechanical engineers having their own target programs. But I don't have any experience. Greenhammer hasn't partnered with anybody on that yet, so I don't know if anybody on this call has.
Yeah, how about Matt or Lindsay? Definitely interesting.
Yeah, a lot of our projects, at Sarah, we will work with KPFF, and I think they are a signatory of SE 2050, but I don't have any personal experience on working in that program.
Yeah, fair enough.
I'm the same as Lindsay and John. I think it's so new and it's great that it's happening. And Naomi, you probably know about this world maybe better than we do. The one thing it makes me think of though is even in the DDX to date, it is interesting to see sometimes an engineering firm will submit in parallel. So, maybe, and Lindsay, John, you probably have experienced this more than us, but like communicating with your consultant team. So, there's one model for that development. It's not duplicating. Maybe you can even collaborate, but even in the current DDX. Anyway, Naomi, did you have thoughts?
Yeah, I can just share what I know from as part of this grant program. I've started to work with the national organizations that have launched SE 2050 and MEP 2040. SE 2050 is its own organization. MEP 2040 is the Carbon Leadership Forum, and they're both just a couple years old. I think there's like several signatories in Oregon. I do know KPFF is one of them. And yeah, the structural engineers is really all about, the embodied carbon of materials, and MEP 2040 is about operational carbon and also refrigerants. And I know that there's a desire for MEP 2040 to align with AIA. So I think a lot of engineering firms are starting to report into DDX, and they're going to add the refrigerant piece. And then SE 2050 has its own reporting. But part of the reason we reached out, that Energy Trust reached out to engage them, is that I know there's an effort underway. I think the AIA Large Firm Roundtable is working on this around aligning the three initiatives, because they're all the same buildings, right? that these different practitioners are working on. And so I think the goal over the next several years is to sort of, improve that alignment. And so our hope with adding these two initiatives is to do that, and ultimately to inspire more engineering firms in Oregon to sign on. So hopefully we'll see more traction there in the next few years.
Nice, thank you. All right, well, we are nearing the end of our time together. Does anyone have kind of any maybe a minute or so of kind of closing thoughts? I'll start with Lindsay.
Yeah, sure. Working at Sarah and having them, be a part of this process for so long, it's easy for me to sit here and say like, oh, send out a survey, like all of your employees will at least know what it is, and like acknowledge that they saw the email with the survey in it, and everything will kind of magically work. But at the same time, like if you are in the early stages and you're just like, oh my gosh, like there's so much data, half of it we don't even understand yet, that's okay. Like I think just by starting and just tracking it, and even if the data is wrong, if you're using the same process, the data will all be wrong the same way. So the relationships between the information that you're reporting, those are still meaningful. So if you're setting percentage reductions for a specific project type or whatever, like that percentage is still meaningful, even if you're not entirely sure what you're reporting yet. So just get started, just try, and remember that even if you aren't energy modeling, or you aren't doing an energy model for every single project, it's okay. There are defaults that will get you there, referencing the location and the climate zone and the use type and energy code and everything. So just get started.
Matt and John, I might just end it there. I think that's fantastic, is just get the ball rolling and get started. Thank you, Lindsay. I think that sums it up perfectly. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. I really appreciated having all of you on the call. And just a reminder that the upcoming application period for the NZELI grant process is in the spring of 2023, and then the applications will be open through July. So definitely watch for information about that if you're interested in having an intern help kind of get started, like Lindsay said, for your firm. So thank you so much, everyone. Pleasure to have you, and hope you have a great evening.